What's up, everybody? Jensen Cummings here. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. This episode of Best Served fresh ideas, new approaches to the restaurant model. As you guys have seen, we're kind of parsing out in channel so we can focus conversations on the topics that are important to our guests and to specific parts of our audience. Great show today. Irene Li from Mei Mei restaurant out in Boston is on. Irene, great to see you. Thanks for being on.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, we're going to talk open book management is one of the big picture items that we're going to talk about and dissect a little bit. Before we get into that, tell everybody, Mei Mei, what can they expect from Mei Mei restaurant in Boston?
So Mei Mei means little sister in Mandarin Chinese. And back in 2012, our big brother, Andy, had an idea to open a food truck. He invited his two little sisters to help him. We strong-armed him into naming the business after us. The rest is history. When we first hit the road, the food truck industry was still really new in Boston. So that was a super exciting time. We focused a lot on sort of farm to table or farm to street food. And we opened our restaurant, very small restaurant in the Boston University neighborhood of Boston about a year and a half later. And in the years since then, I would say our focus has shifted a lot from sourcing and, working directly with farmers and supporting local food infrastructure over to, trying to crack this really tough nut, which is restaurant employment and how we create careers and jobs that are equitable and sustainable for people who love food and deserve to be able to have careers in the industry.
I absolutely love that. Take us back even further. 2012. This is nice. And it's family. I absolutely love that. My family's been in the industry for 120 years, five consecutive generations.
Wow.
It's in our blood. We're gluttons for punishment. You know what I mean? And so, and going into business with family, that's a whole episode for sure.
Definitely.
Take us back. When did you first catch the hospitality bug? How did that come about? Did you always know you were going to be in food? Like, give us a little bit of that backstory.
Right. So I think restaurant ownership skips a generation in our family because grandma and grandpa had restaurants, but then their kids all became doctors and lawyers. And then their kids were fortunate enough to be able to, make choices based on following our hearts and not economic imperative. And so that's sort of how I ended up here. We've always really been a family that is centered around food, like literally around the dinner table, but also, of course, every family vacation. It's like while we're eating dinner, we're talking about breakfast the next morning, and so on. And so I think that, for me, I watched my brother get into the hospitality industry. He worked mainly in the front of house as a GM. He started out as a bouncer. And
how much older a brother?
He is 9 years older than I am.
Okay.
So
big brother.
Yes, he really paved the way for me to also end up in this industry. But I think what I recognized was that hospitality was so ingrained in him, not just from his training, but because hospitality is so key to Chinese culture and also Chinese American culture. The fun fact that a lot of people say is when you speak Chinese, when you're asking, like, how are you? One way of saying that is, have you eaten yet?
Yes, I've heard that. I love that.
Yeah. So if you've ever been like force fed something by someone's Chinese mom, like now you know why, because that's their way of saying, we care about you and we want you to be comfortable. We want you to be happy. We want you to feel at home. And so for me, seeing my brother really excel in that area and be such a natural, that was super inspiring. And when we first started out, I was way more kind of on the food and farm side. But what I learned from him about hospitality, I think is definitely at the center of what Mei Mei is about today.
Yeah, and if you had to encapsulate that in a couple of words, what's the ethos that your brother instilled that you're now kind of carrying the torch and furthering along?
I think the ethos is that you and the guest are on the same team. That you do not have to be at odds with them, and also that one should give freely of what is free, or roughly free. Time and emotional energy are not inherently free, but to the extent that, making time for someone, noticing them, sort of really seeing them, that's free. That's something that I think is really important to hospitality.
Yeah, it just takes awareness and effort. I think that's great. And internal and external guests, right? The hospitality has to start internally. I know you're a big buyer of that, and you've succeeded and struggled mightily through all that. And we're going to get into that a little bit. So you open the restaurants, and then you open the food truck, then you go to the restaurants. Give us an idea, kind of what was people's take, bringing your culture forward, bringing dumplings that were culturally relevant to you, that again were like feeding your soul, very much so, and nourishing your body. Give an idea, what were those early days? Was Boston just all in? Did you have to earn the trust? Give us a little bit of the dynamic of kind of your guests. And I'm guessing you also had to train a lot of people who had maybe never experienced those type of food items within the kitchen, things like that. Give us a little bit of insight.
Yeah, so one thing I'll share is our best-selling menu item that our cookbook is now named after is called the Double Awesome, and it is a scallion pancake sandwich with 2 slow-poached eggs, cheddar cheese, and like a green sauce, a pesto. So that is definitely not like my grandma's version of Chinese food, right? And so when we think about what creative Chinese American food means, it's not about being authentically, traditionally Chinese, because that's not us. And so the food we cook is about being authentic to our experience, you know, being Asian American, growing up in Boston, having just a very multicultural upbringing. And I think that, you know, we still exist because a lot of people identify with that. There are certainly many other people who are very concerned that we are not a real Chinese restaurant run by real Chinese people. And they have let us know on Yelp. And, you know, we're so sorry. And there are so many great, very authentic Chinese restaurants, and we would love for you to also support those. So I think that we have really been able to kind of distinguish ourselves as a sort of modern and multicultural cuisine in a way that is welcoming, hopefully, to everyone. But of course, we know that we can't be all things to all people. What I love most is when other Asian Americans come to the restaurant and immediately recognize, like, this is the kind of thing that I would have scrounged together after school with a combination of like American junk food and like the classic stuff in our family's freezer. You know, again, that's like being seen in a way that the guest sees us and we also see them. And so I think for me, like that is a very special version of the guest experience.
Parents, grandparents, the Double Awesome. Were they buyers? Was they doubters? Give us a little bit of that. The family, what was the dynamic there?
Yeah, so I think my mom was pretty nervous about all of us getting into the food service industry, but I think she was really happy that we were doing it together, and it did mean that we were all moving home to Boston. So I think we like planned that pretty well so that she could only complain a certain amount. And you know, my joke, which I think is also true, is like once she realized she could be like a hard-ass mom about any profession that we were in, it didn't have to be medicine. She was like, oh, okay, I got this. And so now, you know, prior to the pandemic, you would see her spot cleaning the windows in the restaurant, making sure the flowers all had enough water. You know, she was like all in, I think, once she realized how serious we were.
That's like the quintessential Tiger Mom scenario of like the classic American immigrant story, right? Like college and education and then medicine, accounting, these different practices were the unlock to the American dream.
Yeah.
And so their expectation was that our parents worked to the bone to be able to put us through college. You're not going into the restaurant. But then they saw that you could have the same intensity that they had in, say, medical school in a restaurant. Then they were buyers. I love that.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah. And, you know, our parents are a lot more sort of American than I think the prototypical Tiger parents. But ultimately, it all comes down to the same thing, which is that you want something good for your children. And you hopefully want it to be better than what you had, especially if you really struggled as an immigrant, as a person of color, whatever it is. And I think that for my mom and for us, we really needed to be clear that it wasn't about just running a restaurant, right? It was about creating a space. It was about creating jobs and community, and about trying to push the idea of what a restaurant is forward, not just to kind of sign on to the industry as it exists.
Let's get into that. You're pushing it forward. Sometimes I'm sure it feels like pushing mud uphill. This is a crazy industry. The status quo of this industry was not built for the success of the humans within that industry.
Exactly.
Save a few. And so it's a really difficult industry. One of the big picture ideas that I'm always like trying to get towards is how do we create, and I love you said 2/3 of it, an equitable, profitable, sustainable industry based on an idea that we have called the Paragon Pillars. We won't get into that, but one of the big things on that is being able to, like, I want to see 65-year-old line cooks getting ready to retire because our industry invested in the infrastructure, the human capital to be able to have that become the norm, the gold watch and the pension and all that American dream, a reality in our industry. You just don't see it. It's not sustainable. It comes through humans. And so pushing the industry forward at a high level, what does that mean for you?
For me, I think it means exactly as you said, recognizing the potential of every person and then investing in that potential as if you believe that, you know, the retirement at 65, which for us, you know, it's hard to even imagine that. But if you believe that that's possible, then it means you just have to invest in your team until you get to that point. And at Mei Mei with open book management, investing in the team means, number one, making sure that they have work-life balance and they enjoy fair scheduling practices, that they don't get yelled at work. Like, that's really not cool with me. And in terms of like the more formalized systems, open book management, the first step is really just training the team to understand basics of restaurant finance, because we want them to be able to read a profit and loss statement and understand what's actually happening with the business. So when we implemented open book in conjunction with Rethink Restaurants, which is a consulting firm based in Boston, we spent months doing classwork, paying the team to, you know, sit down and learn about numbers. And then since then, we convene every 4 weeks and they look at the real profit and loss statement. And so the goal is to, first of all, offer that transparency so that they know what is actually happening in the business around them, and then empower them to understand that they can actually influence what those numbers are. So, you know, think of your dishwasher in the dish pit. One might imagine that they, you know, just kind of show up to work and do their job. But on the other hand, they see all kinds of things that the owner of the restaurant, much like their other, you know, colleagues, never see. Like how much sauce is coming back on the plate? What are people not finishing? Where's all the waste? And so the idea that everyone on the team has something to offer, if they're incentivized, I think is really core to open book.
So I want to back up just a little bit. The mentality, the ethos of it. Every restaurant is such a personal and unique decision. There's no one size fits all. I can't tell you or anybody else, no matter how smart I think I am, what to do with your restaurant. It's so personal. The thinking is what I'm always focused on. How do we shift mindset, from a scarcity to abundance? We're always in scarcity. There's not enough sales. The labor's too high. We're always clamoring for what I call cut and control versus invest in growth. Like, the mindset needs to shift. So it's clearly that you put yourself into a different mindset. You're focused on the other side of the equation. Like, that, I think, is an important thing for people to understand. Get yourself out of that fight or flight survival mode. Like, I don't have enough time. All of that real shit is also bullshit. You need to feed the investment. So I think that's an important thing. Then let's get into a little bit of granular things to give some people just like where they should be looking. So, and I want to read this from your Eater article, which was great, by the way, and so timely and so needed. And we'll get a link. There's the link right there to check it out. But you said something great. And I want to just read this and quote this. I've always thought to myself that the version of Top Chef that I would want to watch would be chef owners plunging a toilet, cleaning an overflowing grease trap, balancing a balance sheet, and running payroll as fast as they could. A decathlon of all the administrative bullshit.
No one wants to watch that but me.
You know what? It's so real, though. Like, it is exactly what you end up doing. I talk about a lot. Like, if there's 10 things that make you a great chef, only 2 of them have anything to do with cooking.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that's an important thing for people to think about at every level. If you're in culinary school, get good with the plunger, and lighting a pilot light, like things that are actually going to matter in this industry. Knowing the 5 mother sauces will not serve you as well as some of that. So again, thinking, the mindset that I think is important for you. Why was writing this article important? Because you got really vulnerable. You opened up your books and lots of people said, what the fuck are you doing? Why would you do this? Why would you do that? I mean, you put yourself out there in a massive way. So why was it important for you to write this article?
Yeah. So sharing our P&L with the public, to me, it was kind of the logical extension of sharing it with the staff. I think a lot of diners still want the kind of intimacy where they know what is going on behind the scenes. They feel like an insider at their favorite restaurant. And what better way to give them that than to say, like, here's our profit and loss statement. And when you come into the restaurant, you can actually look at it with the insider's perspective that includes, like, oh yeah, we paid this much for that, and this cost that much, and like, don't drop that jar of honey on the ground because that's really expensive. Like, that's an expensive accident. And so I think that, you know, we're fortunate to have a sort of target market that is very curious. And they always want to know what the best practices are, like how to be a good consumer, how to be an ethical consumer. And I think that unless we actually show them the sort of dollars and cents behind that, it's very hard to communicate why food should have the value it does, why diners should make certain choices over other ones.
I'm interested, chicken or the egg scenario here. Were your diners curious and so you fed a need that they have, or are they curious because you've been so open? Where and how does that happen? Because I want anybody who has a restaurant to think like you have an opportunity to cultivate the type of relationship that you want, that you expect, and create a community. It's all humans in communication. I say this every show. Humans, communication, the only thing that matters. Do you think it was because you put it out there that people then were like, wait, I didn't even know I should be curious, but I'm a curious person by nature. Now you are feeding a need that I have. Where and how did that chicken or egg scenario come about?
I think that they absolutely feed off each other. I think that where it all started for me was about transparency and sourcing, going all the way back to sort of our essence in 2012. For me, I had been living in Ithaca, New York, hanging out on farms, going to the slaughterhouse butcher shop every single weekend. And what I realized was I'm getting so much information that I never normally get. And I don't even notice that I'm not getting it until now. And so for me, I think recognizing that a lot of the farm to table movement was sort of shallow in nature, and wanting to provide a deeper look that would kind of, you know, wake people up to the fact that it was not so deep everywhere else. I think that was kind of the first step around transparency that we really tried to cultivate right off the bat. And I do think, as you say, you know, when you start to learn a little bit, you want to know more. And also, when you realize that the door is open, then you are much more likely to step through it, right? And so signaling not just that we want to talk about X, Y, or Z topic, but generally that we are open to sharing this information. Again, like, give freely of what is free, right? It doesn't cost anything to share that information. And so I think that it's been a very kind of positive feedback loop, but it does sort of go back to wanting to, you know, do a little bit better than the status quo, and then wanting to communicate that effectively to people.
So your team, let's internalize this a little bit. We have never shared the books. It's always been hide as much as possible so people don't know the scenarios. The problem with that is this plays out in everything in interacting with humans. No information, you make up crazy shit in your head, and it's always the worst scenarios. And then we wonder, why are people disgruntled? Why aren't they happy? Why don't they like getting yelled at? Things that, you know, when we were coming up, we took as a badge of honor, clearly toxic and not sustainable. So your team, was it weird for everybody? Like, wait, you want me to look at the books? Like they were like looking at like classified documents or something. Like, give us a little bit of like the interaction that you had to like really show people, no, I'm serious. We are empowering you. We are lifting the veil. Those early days of interacting with the staff, I know that was maybe clumsy or awkward or empowering. Give us a little bit of that.
You know, I think a key element of Mei Mei is that just like how I did not really have much of a background in the restaurant industry, most of our key team members have never worked in a restaurant before either. And so maybe they're coming from tech or from education. You know,
see that as a strength to your business?
I think in many ways, absolutely. And so they're often coming from industries that have a lot more transparency than the food world. And so, you know, to be totally honest, when we first started working with these consultants who were providing the curriculum for us, our team wanted more faster. And they wanted to know, like, exactly where is this going? Like, what's going to be on the final? You know, they were raring to go. You know, where's the full syllabus? What's the plan? And I think that, you know, we had to really pivot to provide a lot more information a lot faster than we had initially planned on, which was
you
really
opened up a Pandora's box. You had no idea. You thought you were going to be pulling them, kicking and screaming like you'd expect from, the curmudgeon-y cooks and stuff like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Did you go and seek those people out, or did it happen to be people that found you, or how did that come about?
I think that the people find us because, I try to, again, share as much as I can.
Because they know what you stand for.
Yeah. And I think that when I tell my story, a lot of it is that this was a very unlikely career choice for me in a lot of ways. And so I think introducing the joy and like surprise in that unlikely choice maybe empowers them to make a choice that also feels unlikely for them. I think that for a lot of people, Mei Mei is one of the only restaurants they would consider working at because of how different we are. And I've been fortunate, to get a lot of opportunities to share our story, to speak to people. And that is, I think, one of our best sort of recruiting models, is just making sure that our team and myself, that we get out there and we get to talk about what we do.
Yeah, they know exactly who you are, what you stand for. And so they know what they're getting themselves into. Too much of our industry is mystique. Like, we think the mystique is something that adds value. I think it devalues significantly. Like, yesterday we're talking about job board postings, and so often we tried to be as ambiguous as possible. Like, why? To like hook people and get them to like apply, and then we tell them what it is, and then they go, oh, wait a minute, that's not what I'm about.
Right.
So I think that was important. And to that point, your article was one, but the reason that you're on the show is because our friend Katie Osuna, Ricardo Osuna from the Copper and Heat podcast, amazing. Check them out. Like, this show is not anywhere near what that show is. They are like the Radio Lab of food and beverage podcasts. They're on a whole nother level. Anyway, so they did a great job of kind of breaking down your story into bite-sized pieces that I thought was really interesting. And so definitely wanted to talk to you from that. So big shout outs to Katie and Ricardo and Copper and Heat podcast. Yeah. So they gave you a platform to tell your story in a really creative way, which I thought was amazing. Let's talk about, you were very open and very vulnerable. It was interesting reading the article and then hearing you in the way that you speak. You're like, this shit is crazy. Yet I am so game to figure it out no matter how hard it is. And I know that it has been so hard. So what I want to do is talk to people looking to get into the industry currently, wanting to start a restaurant. Let's be real. Like, this is a crazy struggle. I know recently, you've had to like once again struggle through all this. Let's talk about the struggles, and then let's talk about why it's still important for you to invest in this model that is completely counter to a lot of the things that are the status quo in the industry. Some of the struggles, what are the high ticket items for you?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the main things is that at the end of June, we ended up laying off about 60% of our staff. That was incredibly hard. A lot of, pain for everyone involved in a lot of different ways. And, we had kept everyone pretty much at least partially employed so they could work but still access unemployment up until that time, and had them work on different administrative projects and taking our classes virtual. And so we really spent 3 months kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what would stick. And so, it felt like a failure to ultimately not be able to keep everyone on. And then you look at everything that is going on and you realize, oh, we're all failing really hard, starting with the government and ending with, small business. And so I think that for me, the motivation to keep going is about making sure that Mei Mei is still a place that people are proud to work for and to have worked for. And I really, I don't know what restaurants are going to be in the future. I'm kind of in the camp of like, throw it all away and we'll just start over. And I feel like it's an opportunity, right? It's a scary time, but this is where reimagining becomes so important. And, the timing of our open book event, March 9th. So less than a week later, we closed due to the pandemic. And so I think for me, that was a great opportunity to sort of lift the curtain because the curtain was about to get yanked down by everything else.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Let's get a practical from the P&L and talk about that for a second. What are the couple places that you get the most pushback when people are like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. That's not how you run a successful business. That's not how you run a successful restaurant. what are the couple of the places where you are completely out of whack, let's say, with the norm? I'm doing a lot of air quotes today. I don't know why, but let's go there a little bit. 2, 3 of the spots that we want to kind of talk about that I think are important for people to hear, to know that there is opportunity. Yes, it's going to look completely different, and it's going to drive down your bottom line, which is non-existent already. What are a couple of the places on the P&L that you're focused that other people don't want to be?
It's always going to be direct labor. Direct labor is the thing that fluctuates, the most depending on how busy we are. And there are a lot of ways that we don't compromise, and that we don't feel able to compromise. Nobody at Mei Mei really works more than 40 or 50 hours a week, pretty much ever. And
including ownership?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, not right now, because things are so crazy, and not in the early days. But we have created a system where people get 2 days off, and they get PTO.
Imagine that.
And they can have health insurance. And really, I think the direct labor is non-negotiable, that people should be paid pretty well. One thing that a lot of people wanted to know was what my salary is. And so I did end up sharing that, in the comments section of some deep, dark Facebook hole. And, a lot of people said, like, you can manipulate the books so that you don't have a huge tax burden. And, we are not that smart. It is really more about how much we pay for the things we really value. And I think also it's important to note that there are tons of little things that add up, like paying for compost service, getting, local food when commodity food is really cheap and really easy to get, buying compostable disposables. So I think that there's both like a macro view where it's like direct labor is all jacked up, and then a micro view where we actually can, comb through every little line of overheads and say, oh, this is a choice to pay more than our neighbors, or to pay more than we necessarily have to in order to get, the minimum service that we need. And so I think, the pushback was great. Like, I wanted to start a conversation.
You wanted it. I know you wanted it. Like,
yeah.
Like,
and
let's go. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there is like you show me yours. And that was really like part of what I hoped we would get to.
So I want to, you mentioned direct labor. Give us an idea of where you're at in comparison to kind of the industry norms, just so people have a little bit of context.
Yeah, so we run direct labor usually between about 35 and 50%. In catering season, when we are doing tons of weddings and everyone is really busy, direct labor shrinks exactly according to how great catering is. And so I think industry norms would be anywhere from sort of 30 to 40. But I think that paying for labor is something that everyone is struggling with right now. And really, meeting the demands of younger and more progressive cooks who want the basic, rights that most workers in most industries have, but we're so far behind here. And so I think that for us, we see that as a necessary piece of the work that we're doing. But I think that as an industry, we have a really long way to go.
Yeah, I am like hyper aggressive at managing seconds and pennies, yet I think the seconds and pennies that we're looking at are always on the wrong side of the equation. Right. One of the issues that I see, and I see you playing this out day to day, is we put so much emphasis on cut and control prime costs, our COGS, cost of goods sold, right? Your food cost, your pour cost, and our labor, the direct labor that you mentioned. We also started tying bonuses to those. And I love incentivizing good behaviors. A lot of times it was incentivizing bad behaviors because we spent so much time focused on cutting and controlling food costs, which then is potentially diminishing the quality, going to the cheapest product, bumping margin to a point where you're trying to absorb all these other bad practices and overhead, which can be well over 100 line items in a P&L, and then trying to pay somebody $1 less, $2 less an hour, and then cutting labor to end up at 9% back of house labor. But your Sunday, you had a skeleton crew, nobody, including your guests, had a good experience. And I could ramble on and on and on. We've seen it played out. You know what I'm talking about. Everybody watching who's been in a restaurant knows
good profit and bad profit.
Explain that. Good profit and bad profit. I like that.
I mean, the idea is that good profit is achieved when you didn't have to exploit anyone really horribly to make it. And bad profit is when you're selling someone short. If your customer is getting the short end of the stick because you're using crappier ingredients, if your staff is getting the short end of the stick because you're not paying them overtime or paying them properly, or if you are, just ruining the environment. That is also a method of exploitation that our industry is pretty expert at. And so the idea that, generating good profit and then sharing that good profit, I think is sort of like a key driver of how we keep moving things forward.
Last thoughts. Amazing conversation. Love the work that you're doing. And it's work, right? You're never going to accomplish the work of achieving the new model. It's just like you have to go through the trials and triumphs of that process. So I really appreciate that, and for you taking some time. Last thoughts, anything that you want to think about? Actually, you know what? Not last thoughts. Tell us about some of your people. We're going to run long. This is too good. Tell us about some of your people. We really want to acknowledge them, and you were great. You shared the names of quite a few people, so we're always excited because now I know 4, 5, 6 new people in our industry that I didn't know before this, and that matters to me. So talk about a couple of the humans you get to work with.
Yeah. So one of the things that has been a constant throughout this pandemic period has been the Mei Mei mindfulness practice. So we have a member of the team, Asha Dershi, who previously worked in education, and she created a daily sort of mindfulness check-in that our team has been really privileged to get to go to pretty much every weekday. It is sort of part meditation, part reflection, part team bonding. And I think that, we've all suffered during this time from the isolation, from the change in routine, and we all take different approaches to addressing mental health. But to have this space where we can actually come together and practice, healthy, ways of coping together, like that's just really special. And I feel like we were able to do it in such an authentic way because it was a member of our team introducing it, and not like, outsourcing a yoga class or bringing in some outsider to do meditation or something like that. And so that's been really, really special.
I like that. It feels like also, I'm always trying to connect the dots between the things that we do and are pretty good at in the industry and the things that we're not, and how those are actually maybe more similar. It's pre-shift. Like, find a way that pre-shift is, yes, here's things that were 86, here's low counts, all of those practical things. You absolutely need those. Get it. I love those. I love the details. Check in with the team. Like that's what really matters. How you go about that, I think, is up to you. Again, it's a personal decision. So I really like that. All right, give us some more. Who else is killing it for you?
Well, 2 people who I really look up to in the industry are Josh Lewin and Katrina Jayazeri. She is, I think, one of the most interesting people I've ever met in the industry. She also comes from sort of like an unlikely path and previously was a labor organizer. I'm pretty sure Josh was in the Marines. He'll probably see this and correct me, but they are—
We're getting them both on the show. If you say that they're good people, they're good people. They get the acknowledgement. They're on. Let's go. We'll talk to them.
So they are the ones who initially introduced us to Rethink Restaurants. And so we will forever be indebted because of that. And then there are also 2 of their restaurants, Juliet and Peregrine, were some of the first hospitality included concepts in Boston. And so I think that their approach to transparency with open book, as well as to just finding creative solutions to benefit everyone, again, like the abundance mentality, like it's not pie, there's enough to go around.
Pie.
Yeah.
Sophie, we're getting shirts made. Pie, big quote. It's not pie, people. There's plenty to go around. Abundance mindset. Look it up.
Yeah. And something else I think they do really well is sort of incorporating everyone's strengths and interests into what Juliet is. And so there is, a level of kind of performance art that happens there. They publish a magazine. They make socks and aprons.
Yes.
And so in a sense, it feels kind of like a very old school sort of craftsman kind of environment where everyone gets a hand in making things and everyone gets a hand in deciding what it is that they make. And of course, the food is like really great and really beautiful. And Mei Mei is, you know, by contrast, like a kind of lowbrow, fast casual, which is who I am as a person, I think. But I think the fact that they do all of that and run a restaurant that by all traditional measures is also, you know, are really gorgeous and wonderful. It's really amazing.
I love what you're talking about. I mention this all the time. I get the same feeling, not the same memory experience, the same story, but the same feeling at 3 Michelin stars, $350 a person, as I do a dumpling for $3 and a nickel. Same feeling, because you're just delivering on who you are, why you exist, to be of service. So it's great. All right, let's sneak in one more. This is too good, and then we'll let everyone go.
Well, I would say someone who really helped us was Joe Grafton, who previously was with Rethink Restaurants. And more recently, I actually got to work with him on a project at the Haley House. The Haley House is based in Boston. It's a nonprofit that has a soup kitchen and provides housing. And then they also have a bakery and cafe. And they have been around for 50 years. So that is longevity that, you know, most restaurants never get to even consider. But their cafe, I think it was really struggling over kind of many years of slightly inadequate management that just really piled up. And so ultimately they ended up temporarily closing the cafe. And that was a huge loss to the community, to the neighborhood, you know, which is rapidly gentrifying and trying to maintain its identity in the face of that. And when I looked at what was going on there, I serve on the board at Haley House. I said, they need open book management and they need Joe Grafton. And so we, you know, worked together to create that relationship. And so Joe and the team there have been practicing open book and all of the other best practices, you know, that he is so well versed in. And they are killing it. They're about to reopen. They have a gorgeous patio. The team is doing amazing. And so to me, like, that is a story that eclipses even Mei Mei's story of open book, because it really was about putting the like love and intention of a community into the running of a business, which is something that, you know, we don't see as much of anymore, but such a great example of that.
Hopefully more of that. I so appreciate you having found your purpose, finding a platform to amplify that purpose, and then trying to bring more along, because it's easy to get stuck in your little tunnel of your 4 walls. It's really, really easy. I get it. Like, you're struggling again to like survive. So the fact that you're amplifying that and then being able to highlight Haley House and do work with Joe Grafton, like, I think it's going to be important. We need that type of leadership. Irene Li, I really appreciate you on. Thanks to you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Have a great day. Cheers.
You too.
All right. Open book management, big takeaway. Again, humans, communication, again and again and again and again. That's what it is. That's the game. That's what we're here to do. And so I really appreciate the work that Irene is doing, and open book management. Look into it. I think it is absolutely worth checking out. Again, it's going to be a personal decision how you manage that, yet the mindset of going into investment and growth within your teams, within your business, versus cut and control, which is the way that we've always been taught, still being savvy, smart, prudent, they can coexist. I absolutely believe that. And you'll hear more about the Paragon pillars, which are kind of goals that we have for redefining the industry. I mentioned the 65-year-old line cook. One of the big reasons that this is coming about is because I failed multiple times at trying to be the chef owner and really struggling with the status quo of an industry that I came up in, and just I couldn't reconcile it. And so now I'm coming at it from a different perspective, still trying to bring value and try to develop for the humans in hospitality, our unsung hospitality heroes that matter so much to me, and trying to support them. And the work that Irene is doing is absolutely a model that's going to work for some, hopefully more. And that's what we're trying to highlight here in the Haley House. I love that. We're gonna look into that a little bit more, maybe have a spot for them on the show. So, all right, long show today, but Irene was on fire. Great episode. Appreciate you all as always. Best served fresh ideas, new approaches to the restaurant model. You're going to see that channel coming at you hot and heavy as we move forward with parsing out in these different channels. So look into the different channels. It'll kind of give you an expectation of what that show will be about, what the humans, our guests, are really focused on in their work. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you. Cheers.